Hey, welcome to this week's episode of Ask the Instructor. I'm John Kurtzman. The show is brought to you by the Tampa School of Real Estate. Every Wednesday, 12 noon Eastern Time, we're live, helping you understand the technical side of the real estate industry. And what we're talking about today are the gross rent and gross income multipliers. Now, these are very commonly used calculations when you're trying to understand the value of some sort of investment property. So we're going to talk about how to use those because these are crude, for lack of a better term, kind of estimations of value of a property, but this does give you something in your arsenal for some negotiating power if you're trying to negotiate the price higher or lower. So this is another angle it is you can use to look at to calculate the value on a property. So I'm super excited to bring today's show to you. I'm John Kurtzman. The show is brought to you by the Tampa School of Real Estate. You're watching Ask the Instructor.
You are watching Ask the Instructor. Absorb the knowledge. Become the expert.
Hey, welcome back to this week's episode of Ask the Instructor. I'm John Kurtzman. The show is brought to you by the Tampa School of Real Estate. Every Wednesday, 12 noon Eastern Time, we're live, helping you understand the technical side of the real estate industry. And what we're talking about today is a very essential calculation that you're going to want to know. Now, this is not usually the primary driver of establishing value of an investment of an income-producing property, but this is an alternative way to look at the value of something and really to tell whether this is a good deal. The cap rate might look good, but now how do we compare this to other properties that are available on the market? So let's first start talking out and laying out the gross rent multiplier. So again, that's gross rent multiplier. So the gross rent multiplier is essentially taking the sale price of a property and dividing it by the rent, gross monthly rent. And that gives you your GRM. Now, this could be a really helpful formula for figuring out, again, what the potential value is of a particular property. Bring this down a little bit here. There we are. So I'm going to go ahead and put some sale prices up here on the board, and then we'll go and match up some rents with that. And then we'll be able to calculate out a gross rent multiplier. So let's first start out with let's say we've got a property with a $100,000 sale price. And let's say that this $100,000 property, the rent is, we'll say, $700 per month. Now, the key thing you remember when you're calculating out this, and really you could use this same concept. Now, the official rule is that you're supposed to go off of monthly rent, and that's what you want to remember in case you see this on your exam at all. But if you're using the same concept, again, this is here so we can kind of understand the value of the particular property. But for official gross rent multiplier, you want to use monthly rent. So we'll take that sale price of $100,000 because it's going to be sale price, and then we're just going to divide that out by the monthly rent of $700, and we get a gross rent multiplier of 142.86. Now, the goal here really isn't just to look at one property, but more so compare the property you're considering with other properties in this potential area. And we'll talk about how we could, reverse engineer this number as well to maybe find what would be a acceptable market rent for this particular property. So this one, and the key thing you want to keep in mind here is using similar properties. Because you get into a $200,000, $250,000 property, the rents are going to be higher, but it's not going to be the same proportion of this here. So for example here, let's say if we got a $300,000 home, and we're all dealing just with single-family homes here. And let's say for this $300,000, it rents for $2,000 per month. Again, we just do our simple calculation here, 300,000 divided by 2,000, and now we're getting 150. So as you see, basically, these discrepancies start to occur more. Let's do one more. Let's say we've got a $700,000 house that rents for, let's say, I don't know, we'll say $4,000. So now we take 700,000 and divide that out by 4,000. We end up with 175. So you see these gross rent multipliers are increasing and increasing and increasing. And, you know, maybe we'll go one more in the other direction here. Let's say that we've got a, we've got a property we picked up for $60,000. We're only able to rent it out, let's say, for $500. So we take 60,000, divide that by 500, and there's our gross rent multiplier of 120. So essentially, this is kind of like a ratio of the rent to the sale price that we're figuring out here. Now, if we're using properties that are this across the board, from a $60,000 property to a property that's over 10 times that much at $700,000, this isn't how you're supposed to use this calculation, because you're going to end up not getting a average gross rent multiplier for that particular type of property, which that's ultimately what it is that we're looking for. And in theory, if you don't maybe have any sale price information, maybe there's the properties haven't recently sold, but you could find an established market value for the property, you could potentially use market value for this as well, although that's not the way this is supposed to be done. But again, this is for comparative purposes. So let's say we've got another property, and let's keep them all in the ballpark here. Let's say we've got one for $120,000, we've got one for $90,000. We'll say we've got another that's sold for, and we'll just do, we'll do 5 here. Let's say we've got one for $80,000, and then one for $110,000. Now notice how much closer these are clustered together. This is ultimately what you're going to want, and in theory, we should have numbers that are fairly close to what we've already came up with this here, unless this rent is just way out of the ordinary for this price point. Let's say the $120,000 property is renting at $750 a month. Let's say this $90,000 property is renting at $700 per month. Let's say this $80,000 property is renting at $675. And we'll say the $110,000 property, we'll say it's renting at $675 as well. So again, what we're doing is we're researching this data, we're finding out what these properties rent for, and then what their sale price or their current market value is. And we're using this information to basically come up with this ratio of what the gross rent is in relation to the sale price. So when we start dividing these out, we take $120,000 for this first one, the sale price, divide that by the $750 monthly rent. We end up with $160. And you can see even though this is a higher price, with that higher rent here, it's not quite panning out to that higher price. If we say pick this one here with a $90,000 property, for still that same $700 rent, so again, we take $90,000, divide that by 700, and this one you can see is 128.57. So ideally, the goal here is to have a lower gross rent multiplier, because that means a lower value property but a higher rent. So even though this property here is worth $10,000 more, because the rents are the same, that pushes this gross rent multiplier down. So what that tells us is this property here, this $120,000 property that's only getting a $750 rent, with that gross rent multiplier of 160, it's not as profitable as this $100,000 or that $90,000 property. And let's keep going through this, and we'll continue to dive deeper into this gross rent multiplier concept. So let's look at this $80,000 property. We're going to take that $80,000 and divide it by 675. And that gives us 118. There's our best deal we've got so far, 118.52. I mean, even though this one is one of the lowest rents here on the list because of that price point, I mean, this, again, it's a better ratio. Again, the lower that number is, really the higher return on our investment, or the higher rent it is that we're getting off the sale price. Now, again, the disclaimer with all this here is that this is a crude estimate because we're not factoring in expenses, we're not factoring in vacancy and collection losses, and in theory, as you increase in rent, you're going to have lower vacancy and collection losses typically. So it's not factoring in those details, but just looking at the rent versus the price, you could see how you could quickly find here, and just taking these numbers, because really the only numbers we have the same are some of these rents, but every single one of these sale prices are different, and this is a quick little calculation you could do to find out, okay, just based on the gross rent that they've got coming in, is this a good deal? Now, to really kind of show that difference again, if we take that same rent of $675, but now on a $110,000 property, so $110,000, and divide that by the $675 here, we've got our highest gross rent multiplier of 162.96. So this one would really be, just based on the rent that's coming in alone, this $110,000 property is the worst performing rental here. Because this property, and this is why you're supposed to go off of sale price, because maybe this person purchased this for $70,000, $80,000, and maybe it's a great return on investment it is that they're getting. But this is assuming what you would pay for this property. So if you were to pay $110,000, if that were your price, and you were charging $675 in rent, your gross rent multiplier would be 162.96. Now, where it is that you could use this in the real world is coming up with a market GRM. And in order to do that, what we've got to do first is add these all together. So we're going to add together the 142.86, the 160, the 128.57, the 118.52, and the 162.96. So we crunch all those numbers together. And we end up with a total of 712.91, but we're just finding an average out of that, so we're going to divide it by the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. There's 5 properties, so we divide this by 5 just to find a regular average. And our average GRM for this market is 142.58. So really, this is our most average rental right here, this $100,000 with $700 in rent. Now, if we're looking at buying a property that's, maybe we'll say $105,000, it's vacant, but we're trying to figure out what it is that we should charge based on the market for rent. And that's the idea of taking, or maybe now where you're going to consider more so the value of these properties rather than the sale price of the properties, to find out, okay, based on this value of a property, what would be the going rate for rent in the area. So we take this $105,100, or $105,000, and we're going to divide that by 142.58. And that tells us our rent for this property should be $736. That would be based on this particular market, what that property could probably rent for, $736, based on all this rent data it is that we've collected. Now, if we want to come up with more of a range, here, and can you back that out a little bit just so we could see that a little bit more? Yeah. So if we want to go with maybe a little bit more of a range here, so 736, that's based on the average in this area. Yeah, that looks good. What it is that we should charge for a rent. But let's say we want to go onto the lower side. And on the lower side, it's going to be based off of this 160 gross rent multiplier. So if we take that 105 and divide that by 160, this is going to give us the low end of our rent range. So 105,000 divided by 160. That's going to give us a low end rent range of $656.25. That would really be the lowest out of this entire chart here. Really, the only reason why this rent isn't the lowest is because this is our most expensive property. So even though this is the most expensive, it has the worst gross rent multiplier, the worst ratio essentially of rent in terms of the sale price. So if we take this high, that's the highest, and factor it in on this $105,000 property, our low end for the rent, if we really got to move it, and it's in comparable condition to all these other properties, you want to keep that in mind as well, then $656.25, or just $656, I guess, would be kind of that low end of our rent. But let's say if we really want to push this to the high end of the rent, what could be maybe the most that somebody would be willing to pay in this particular property? So this is our lowest gross rent multiplier here of 118.52. So again, now we take this 105,000 and divide that now by 118.52. And when we go ahead and divide this one out, we end up with 885. Not really, we'll round it off to 886. Keep it to the full dollars. And we'll just drop off that 25 there. So ultimately on this property, based on our analysis of rents in this area, that's what you're doing with a gross rent multiplier. You're analyzing the rents in a particular market. Our average GRM is 142.58, which would say that our average rent for this property would be $736. On the low end, though, of our range, if we're going to take that highest gross rent multiplier, it'd be $656. So on the low end, $656, but on the high end, $886. So that's a pretty wide range there. We're talking about over $200 from the low end to the high end, and that's because there is some discrepancies in these rents that we've got here. Now, this isn't actual data. This is all just kind of numbers that I've picked up here. But, I mean, you'll see this. This isn't uncommon to see this much maybe of a discrepancy. And this is where you want to keep more so in mind the comparable properties. So maybe this property, even though it's $120,000, maybe it's in bad shape, which why is it's not renting for more. And maybe this $80,000 property is in great shape for an $80,000 property. So a $105,000 property, if we're looking at these other rentals and we're trying to figure out, well, where is it that, we could be? And again, this is all a part of our research here. This is part of our research. This is maybe before we even have considered looking at any other numbers on the property. We're just trying to find out what this property could potentially rent for. And that's our numbers. If we're trying to get a rent that's exceeding $886, it's going to be almost impossible because there's nothing in the market saying that you'd be able to command that ratio of rent based off of the value it is for the property. It's not impossible, but going to be close to it because you're really asking for a high amount of rent, and that's where you've got to keep in mind that principal substitution. If they could find another property that's similar for a lower price, they're going to take that lower price. And then on the reverse end of this here, if we're trying to find out, okay, well, if we're not going to put any work in the property and just, let it rent as is, what's like the cheapest? What's the lowest? If, this is just, bare bones, scummy property, well, let's say, what's the most rent we could get from that? And so then on that low end there of $656, is that's saying that, okay, that's kind of at the low end of what somebody would be willing to pay. But this is how, again, you use the gross rent multiplier to really get an understanding of how the rents in the area relate to the sale prices of these properties. And again, you can also use this as a negotiation tool, and that's maybe where you want to pull in the gross income multiplier as well when you're trying to negotiate this out. We're going to take a quick commercial break, but when we come back, we're going to talk more about this and talk about using this to negotiate the price on your property. But then on top of that, we're also going to talk about the gross income multiplier and how you can use that to negotiate on your property as well. So stick with us. I'm John Cursimo. You're watching Ask the Instructor. If you've been thinking about real estate, look, in this current market, it's hard not to. There's so many opportunities that exist out there for residential real estate, commercial real estate, business brokerage, property management. I mean, it's ridiculous how much opportunity lies from having a real estate license. So look, if you've been thinking about getting a real estate license, I mean, it's minimal cost compared to starting other careers and starting other businesses to get into this. So I urge you to check it out. And and give it a try. I mean, even if you're just using your license for personal use, you've got huge, immense benefits there. Go to this link. It's licensefl.com. That's licensefl.com. Put that link in the description. It's got your step-by-step guide to get a Florida real estate license. And look, check it out. Give us a call. We're here to answer any questions it is that you have, and go out there and make some money.
Does your current career allow for unlimited income potential? With a career in real estate, the sky is the limit. What you put in is what you get out. Find out more about how you can tap into the unlimited income potential of a career in real estate at tampaschool.com. Did you know that statewide only about 50% of test takers pass their state exam on the first try? At the Tampa School of Real Estate, we've broken down passing class and state exams into 4 simple steps: learning the information, reinforcing the information, testing your knowledge, and being confident and prepared. View the details of the full strategy at passfirsttry.com. That's passfirsttry.com.
Hey, if you're enjoying the show today, which I'm sure you are, be sure to hit like, subscribe, post your comments, share with your friends and family. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hey, welcome back to this week's episode of Ask the Instructor. I'm John Kurtzman. This show is brought to you by the Tampa School of Real Estate every Wednesday, 12 noon Eastern Time. We're live helping you understand the technical side of the real estate industry. And what we're talking about today is gross rent and gross income multipliers. Now, we already talked about how you do a gross rent multiplier analysis of a particular area. You look for properties that are similar, what the sale price is, what they're renting for. You divide that out. Sale price divided by rent gives you your gross rent multiplier. You calculate out the gross rent multipliers for all the properties. You find the average by adding them together and dividing by the number of properties, and that gives you your average gross rent multiplier in that market. And that's a helpful number to have, because now when you look at properties, you can tell whether they're above average or below average. So like I was saying, you could use this for when you're negotiating the purchase of, let's say, this $105,000 property. So let's say on this $105,000 property that it's currently renting for, we'll say, $675 a month. So if the rent on this property, $105,000, is renting for $675, if you're negotiating with them, they might try to justify that and say, well, this property here is sold for $110,000 and that's renting for $675 as well. So you're getting a deal here because you're getting the same dollar amount of rent for a lower sale price. And you look at that and you're like, wow, I guess that is a pretty good deal. That does seem like pretty good. Unless you really do the analysis in here and find out that this $110,000 is the worst performing property in terms of gross rent multiplier. It has the highest gross rent multiplier, and with gross rent multiplier, it's like a golf score. You want it to be low. The lower that gross rent multiplier is, the better ratio it is that you're getting, the better return it is that you're getting off the sale price you paid for the property. So that's the benefit of being able to do this analysis, because they've got a strong argument that, this is a better deal than that $110,000 house. Okay, great. So it's not the worst deal in the neighborhood, but where should it be? Well, based on the average GRM, this 142.58, this property should be renting for $736. $736. Now, let's say we're going to take that, and this is another way you could kind of negotiate it. Let's say we're going to take this average GRM, and let's say that this property was renting for $675. If we take $675 and multiply it by the gross rent multiplier of 142.58, that will give us the value of this property based off of the rent. And again, with this, there's a lot of other things to keep in mind as well. The cap rate is usually a lot better indicator of the successfulness of a rental property or the return on investment. But this, again, is another way, another angle we could look at this to really understand the full scope of this here, because the rent, that's our top line. Without rent, doesn't matter what our expenses are or anything like that. The rent is the most important concern, and really understanding this range here to understand, if you've got any wiggle room to increase the rent possibly. So if we take this $675 rent, let's say the property does rent for $675. So what should this $110 or this one that's being asked $105,000 actually sell for? Well, we multiply that by the average of 142.58, and that gives us $96,241. So you might be able to negotiate yourself $10,000 off of their asking price. They're maybe asking $105,000, but if their rent is only $675 based on the analysis of this market, including that one, and we're not doing any special weighting on these properties or anything like that, we're just taking a straight average of all these divided by 5, and that tells us the average gross rent multiplier is 142.58. Well, based on that 142.58, this property should only be priced at $96,241. So now we've got some ammunition, we've got some firepower to be able to negotiate off of based on this. Now, this is based on rent. Now, there's one more I want to go over before we finish up for the day, and that's the gross income multiplier. And with the gross income multiplier, it's really the same concept, but rather than using rent, we would use income of the property. And so let's say this, and again, we're just dealing with single-family homes here, but this is equally compatible and usable for multifamily homes as well. I mean, you could even potentially use it for office space, really anything where there's a rents and income. So it's not limited really to any property in particular. You just have to understand what you're doing when you're doing these calculations. So let's say the income on this $700 property, let's say gross income, we'll say $8,000. We'll factor in a little vacancy and collection losses there. And on this one, we'll say, we'll say here $7,500. On this one, we'll say $8,200. On this one, let's say it is, and again, you want to look for the actual numbers here, not just making them up like I'm doing here. But yeah, let's say this one is, let's see, 675. We'll say 6,500. And then on this last one here, we'll say it is 8,100. So let's see how these numbers all pan out. Now again, we're doing basically the same exact math, but now instead of doing sale price divided by rent, we're doing sale price divided by the income. So first we'll start out with that $100,000 property divided by the $8,000 of gross income. Really, it's all the same stuff except for instead of rent, we're dealing with gross income. And now the key thing you want to keep in mind for gross income is that we're dealing with annual numbers here as opposed to rent. We're dealing with monthly numbers. So 12.5 is for this first property. 100,000 divided by 8,000 gives us 12.5. For the next one, $120,000 of sale price divided by $7,500 of gross annual income, we've got 16. Now again, just like our gross rent multiplier, the lower the number, the better. That means we have more income coming in. And that becomes pretty obvious with these two here. This property only for $100,000 has $8,000 of gross income versus this $120,000 property only has $7,500 of income. With those numbers right there, you can see comparing them that obviously this is the better investment in terms of gross income coming in, and that's what these ratios are telling us. That's what these multipliers are telling us, that that lower number is a better return on investment. Now if we look at the next one here, 90,000 divided by 8,200. Oh, we've got a really good one here, 10.98. So that looks like our best investment so far based on gross income. And then this one down here, 80,000 divided by 6,500, 12.31. And this last one, $110,000 divided by 8,100 gives us 13.58. So now again, this isn't the worst performing one, This one still is the worst performing, this $120,000 property, but now we've got additional numbers it is that we could use. Additional calculations. Again, we could come up with an average by adding these all together, dividing it by 5, and really doing the same math now based off of income as opposed to based on rent. And I recommend doing both of these. I mean, again, both of these are more ammunition, more firepower, more tools you have to negotiate the sale price of these investment properties. And you could use this on the flip side as well. If you're trying to negotiate a higher price as the seller, you could take these numbers to your advantage as well. Now, I mean, if you're this person here, it doesn't make sense because if you compare to the market, you know, you're not that good of a deal. But if you do have a property that is a better deal based on what it's renting, or maybe you want to show the possibility. It's really a different way of using these numbers. So maybe you want to show the possibilities. Even though this one's renting for $675, we could say, yeah, it's severely undervalued because based on the gross rent multiplier, we might be able to get rent as much as $886. Or even if we just bring it up to the lowest one, that brings it up to $656. So this gross rent multiplier really shows you a lot about, you know, your ability to command a higher rent or whether or not you have to charge a lower rent, you know, what the market will command for that. And then same idea for the income. Now, the income one, I don't think this one is as useful as gross rent multiplier. It definitely has its place. When you start getting involved with income, that's usually where you're looking more so at the capitalization rate and the income capitalization approach to value. But this is another one, again, that you could use that gives you a different number here. And let's say we wanted to predict what the income would be if we paid $105,000. So let's just say the average for this, we'll just say is 12. You'd obviously want to calculate the actual average, but for the sake of time, let's just say the average was 12. So if we take $105,000, divide that by 12, that would say that our estimated of gross income based on the gross income multiplier, and again, this is a very crude estimate, but would be $87.50. So based, if that market GRM was 12, it's probably actually a little bit higher than that. But in this particular case here, I mean, we could potentially have the highest income out of any of these properties here. And so this is, again, you know now how to calculate this, but now you've got to make it make sense. You have to give it purpose. You have to put it in a situation where you understand what these numbers mean and you could use your understanding of those numbers to your advantage to negotiate a lower price, to maybe negotiate a higher price. You might say, yes, it is only renting for $675 right now, but based on the market, because now you're the seller doing this gross rent multiplier, you know, based on the market, this property is overdue for a rent raise, so therefore you could automatically increase your income by raising the rent. And you showed them this gross rent multiplier calculation here, and they see that these rents exist out there and that these gross rent multipliers exist and that $736 is what this property should be renting for. I mean, we're talking about $50 of additional rent for this property, which that can make a big impact in overall return on investment and profitability of this property. And again, that's why we want to know these numbers here. Because if we ask that question, well, can we raise the rent? These are the numbers we use to back that up, to really kind of give us some evidence that shows us that, yes, we would be able to raise the rent, or we should be able to raise the rent. Or if we raise the rent, it's not going to negatively affect us too much because we're already way below market value for rent. And this, again, is a buyer, how you could find opportunities. You might find this property right here. Yeah, it's only an $80,000 property. If these were all properties available for sale, this $80,000 property based on gross rent multiplier is your best deal, hands down. Now, again, there might be other details that make this not a great deal compared to the others, but this, again, we weigh out these different approaches to value. We weigh out these different, the gross rent multiplier, the gross income multiplier, the capitalization approach, and we figure out, okay, you know, this one seems like the best in every test it is that we throw at it. This one's got the best numbers. This one has the best performance, so we should go with this property. So, and there's a lot there's a lot more to it even than just the numbers when you're talking about investing in real estate, but the numbers are our foundation. The numbers are our backbone. Really nothing else is an option whatsoever until we've got the numbers figured out. I don't care what you think about this $120,000 property. It had really it's the worst performing. Now, this one's slightly worse on overall rent, but this one's maybe a little bit more profitable here for overall income because we only had 13.58 for gross income as opposed to this one here being 16 for gross income. So again, these are ways we can kind of score the properties that we're looking at here and narrow down to which one would be our best investment. So that's about all the time we've got for today. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you want to watch the replay of today's episode, go to tampaschool.com/success. Again, that's tampaschool.com/success. You can watch the full replay of today's show as well as all the previous episodes of Ask the Instructor as well as State of Real Estate. There's all kinds of helpful articles, tools, calculators, so much available on that site. Again, it's tampaschool.com/success. If you've got questions about obtaining your real estate license, completing post-licensing, doing continuing education courses, or maybe preparing for your real estate exams, give us a call. We have advisors standing by to answer any questions you have and assist you in any way it is that they can. That phone number is 813-333-2676. Again, that's 813-333-2676. It's about all the time we've got for today. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you Friday for State of Real Estate. Hey, so if you're thinking about starting a real estate career, it could feel a little overwhelming sometimes. Look, that's completely understandable. That's why we're here to help. If you haven't already, check out our Success Center, tampaschool.com/success, or if you don't even know where to begin, give us a call. We'd love to help you out. We've got advisors standing by to answer any questions you have and assist you in any way it is that we can. Our phone number is 813-928-0106. Again, that's 813-928-0106. Give us a call. We're the Tampa School of Real Estate.
Do you want a career that allows you to be in control? With a career in real estate, you'll get to call the shots. Whether you're looking at starting part-time or want to become the next top agent, a career in real estate makes it possible. Find out what it takes at tampaschool.com. Do you want to incorporate studying for your real estate exams into your busy schedule? Now you can review the key topics you need to know to pass your class and state exams with our MP3 audio review. Simply pop in your headphones or connect to your car to reinforce crucial information while you exercise or drive. Listen to the first unit for free at mp3audioreview.com. That's mp3audioreview.com.
Are you thinking about a career in real estate? Hey, I'm John Christma with the Tampa School of Real Estate, and we've helped thousands of people just like you obtain their real estate license. If you're thinking about a career in real estate, give us a call. The phone number is 813-928-0106. Our advisors are standing by to answer any questions you have and assist you in any way they can. Hey, if you're enjoying the show today, which I'm sure you are, be sure to hit like, subscribe, post your comments, share with your friends and family. Thank you guys so much for watching.